I don't know, applause in sign language. Hi, and welcome to the Lost Book Reports. Today we are going to do the first 10 pages today we're going to do the first 10 pages, and the book we're going to read today is Someday My Prince Will Come, True Adventures of a Wannabe Princess, a memoir by Jerramy. And I'm not going to give too much away about this book, but I can tell you that I absolutely love it. And it has so many, it was way better than I expected it to be, way different than I expected it to be. And it's definitely a fun, light read, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. But then if I was doing these, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't highly recommend the book. Does that make sense? So as the first 10 pages works, I'm going to read the first 10 pages of the book, and the whole point is so that you can get an idea of whether you want to read this book or not. Because maybe this is a book you never thought of picking up, and hopefully you like it enough and you're going to go to your library or go buy it or something. So that's the whole point of the first 10 pages. I also have been dying to do this book, and I finally felt princessy enough today to do it. And one last thing, people. I got macarons today. And I got lavender, and I've never had lavender before, and I don't know why I'm sharing this with you, but I'm so excited about it, and I just feel so princessy. So I got macarons today, lavender, and then this is strawberry. I got another strawberry one, but I've never had lavender before, so I'm kind of excited. I feel that's very European of me to have a lavender flavored something. But if you've never had macarons before and you know they're very popular lately, I highly recommend it. And they're gluten-free. So if anybody didn't know that, they're gluten-free. And so I'm very, very excited. And now my dog's eyeing them, so I need to put them back in the bag. But macarons are yummy. Go eat them. That is my public service announcement for the day. Now back to reading the first 10 pages. Prologue. I was very young, but I was drawn to my destiny as if by a magnet. Lying on my bedroom floor and propped up on my elbows, I studied every word in that precious library book. The font was tiny, and the pages themselves were almost half the size of my 6-year-old self. But my future depended on this, so I had to stay focused. I carefully followed the intricate lines of the Windsor family tree, and individually assessed each male name to see if it was suitable. So far I had found an Earl who was almost 9. An Earl was okay, but 9 was kind of old. Then there was the Lord. The Lord might have worked, but he was only 4. Probably still in preschool. My finger slowly traced over each name and birthday, searching for the perfect combination. Then, as if it had been magically guided, my hand suddenly stopped. Peter Mark Andrew Phillips, born 1977. He was my age, the only eligible English royal in the world that was my age. I circled his name over and over with my little fingertip, and in that moment, for better or for worse, I felt the direction of my life changing irrevocably. Chapter 1. Jerramy, as a friend, I'm telling you that you're absolutely delusional. Max's voice boomed in the quiet Indian restaurant. No matter where we went in London, his loud New York accent never failed to make a scene. But I'd given up pleading with him to tone it down. No, I'm not, I said defiantly. Think about it. How many girls actually say they want to become a princess? And how many actually go out there and try to do it? Max looked me straight in the eye. And how many of those girls are under the age of 7? Well, I guess he had a point. I was not under the age of 7. In fact, I was 16 years older than 7. I had 16 years to come to my senses, but the simple fact remained. I was 23 years old and still believed that one day I would become a princess. To be honest with you, I have no idea how it started. I cannot remember a time in my life when becoming a princess was not my main ambition. There was a time, I believe it was preschool, when all my friends dreamed of becoming princesses too. But later, when my friends moved on and dreamed of becoming actresses, astronauts, and flight attendants, I still wanted to be a princess. Those same girls actually grew up and became lawyers, fashion buyers, and management consultants. I was still trying to become a princess. I wasn't stupid. I knew this wasn't a career that my high school guidance counselor could help me with. I knew perfectly well that I couldn't just go out and get a PhD in princess studies and buy a royal title off eBay and crown myself on my own coronation. If only. Now, I was painfully aware that breaking into my chosen vocation was going to be far trickier than that. But the thing was, unless I could biologically prove that I had real royal blood in my veins, which for the record I was working on, becoming a princess was sadly something I couldn't achieve through my own independent efforts. To legitimize my particular professional dream, I had to marry a prince. Simple as that. Now, many would point out that I live in the 21st century and that princes aren't exactly a dime a dozen anymore. In fact, for the most part, they are pretty much obsolete. So, 18th century Chippendale dressing tables aren't exactly a dime a dozen either, but that doesn't mean I couldn't go out and find one if I tried hard enough. Granted, limited edition antique English furniture is slightly easier to track down than a 20-something eligible male royal, but the point is, it's not impossible, and I explained this to Max. Do you know how stupid you sound when you say that, Max taunted. Saying your ideal career is to be a princess is just as ridiculous as saying your ideal career is to be a first lady. I laughed. First lady is a good plan B. Sometimes I had no idea why I was friends with Max, but I appreciated his bluntness, no matter how brazen or obnoxious. Okay, Max continued, let's say that hypothetically you really do meet one of these royal assholes. How are you going to get his attention? You are hot, but you're not the hottest girl I've ever met. You might be able to pull off a one-night stand with the prince, but for more than that, you'd have to be super, super hot. I'm talking uber hot. I rolled my eyes. I knew better than to be insulted. Thanks, Max. The waiter came and placed half a dozen steaming dishes onto our little table. I piled some rice from my plate while Max helped himself to chicken jalfrezi? Jerramy, Max sighed. For a girl as intelligent as I know you are, you really worry me. One of these days, you're going to have to start living in the real world. I took a large gulp of my white wine. Honestly, if I had an ounce of royal blood for every time someone mentioned the real world to me, I'd be a princess by now. Most of my family and some of my very closest friends had at least learned to humor me. They saw my princess complex as a quirky and rather amusing endearment. But pretty much everyone else just laughed, shook their heads, and looked at me with pity. Exactly what Max was doing at that very moment. I knew what everyone was thinking. How could such a bright girl have such a ridiculously frivolous and downright impossible goal? And here it comes. When was she going to grow up and start living in the real world? My question was this. What's so wrong with living in a fantasy world? Seriously, what's so wrong about ignoring the conventions and practicalities of the so-called real world and actually pursuing your childhood dream? Sometimes I think the real world is just a phrase invented by adults to give credibility to the miserable lives they've created for themselves. Feel free to call me delusional, but I was someone on this planet who, no matter how silly it seemed, was actually listening to my heart. I trusted it, believed it, and followed it. And in my opinion, there was nothing more real in this world than that. So no matter how much I was teased, or how many obstacles I faced, or how many birthdays I celebrated past the age of 7, my singular desire to become a princess remained firmly in my heart, and I often thought it would take nothing short of an exorcism to remove it. I had an odd fixation with Snow White when I was a child. In fact, I had accumulated such a huge collection of Snow White memorabilia that the Denver's Children's Museum put it on display. I insisted on dressing up as Snow White for Halloween 5 years in a row, and every day after preschool I'd rush home to listen to my Snow White record on my Fisher-Price record player. I wasn't allowed TV, so it was the next best thing to the video. Don't forget that back in the 70s, there was no such thing as a Disney store. There was no princess collection aisles filled with everything a little girl like me could only dream of playing with. For my second birthday party, my mom had to scour the party shops to find anything vaguely Snow White themed. And when she finally found plastic Snow White cake toppers, she thought she'd hit the jackpot. I was so happy I didn't even notice that my health nut parents were serving me a sugarless carrot cake with sugarless icing. I guess you could say that Snow White was my best, albeit imaginary friend. And whenever I was upset about my non-royal life, I would confide in her. My mom said she overheard me all the time. "Snow White," I would sob, "you are the only one who understands." Looking back on it, it makes perfect sense. Snow White was an orphan princess, and so was I. I was born in Denver, Colorado, a city filled with rather bland collection of modern architecture. The one exception The one exception was the state capitol building, which compared to the dull structures surrounding it, seemed positively majestic. With its marble steps, huge Roman columns, and golden dome, the first time I saw it in all its stately splendor, I was a toddler strapped into the back seat of the family station wagon. As we drove closer to it, and eventually past it, my mother said I had burst into tears. When she asked me what was the matter, I whimpered simply, I didn't see the Queen. Evidently, I was so upset that she didn't have the heart to tell me that the building wasn't a palace, and that the Queen didn't live there, or more importantly, that Colorado had no reigning monarchy. I was left to discover these devastating facts on my own, and for the next few months, every time we drove past the Capitol, I would continue to scan the windows, anxiously looking for royal family members I might recognize. And not just any royal family members, my own royal family members. In the beginning, my parents thought I was just unusually precocious, or perhaps blessed with an overactive imagination. I wasn't getting my royal ideas from TV. I wasn't allowed to watch television. I wasn't getting my ideas from books. I couldn't read yet. But as a toddler, my behavior became even more bizarre they began to worry. One day when my mom dug out her old photo albums and showed me pages from her early years in Europe, I wouldn't rest until she let me put the tattered postcards from her visit to the crown jewels on my bedroom wall. My mom tells stories of how she would wake me up in the morning for nursery school, how I'd eerily gaze up at her without a hint of recognition and say, "You're not the woman who dresses me." Or another time when I toddled up to her with my tiny hands placed hotly on my tiny hips and said, "Where's my armoire?" "What's an armoire?" my dad asked me. My poor parents, apparently I constantly addressed them with an arrogance and superiority unheard of in a 2-year-old, as if I were doing them a favor living amongst them in their humble home. And to be honest, that's exactly how I felt. My whole world always seemed like an altogether foreign environment to me. And as a little girl, I felt increasingly frustrated that no one seemed to understand who I was, even if I wasn't entirely sure myself. It wasn't long before my parents saw a pattern. Not only was I obsessed with royalty, I behaved like royalty. It couldn't have been easy for them, but very much to their credit, my mom and dad had never insulted that their little girl frequently treated them like lowly commoners. And in retrospect, I actually have to concede that my parents were extremely open-minded in their assessment of me. After much reading on the subject and discussion with their friends, they decided that the explanation was relatively simple. I had been a princess, or some type of high-ranking royalty, in a past life. Because I was so young, past life memories were surfacing regularly, and I was having difficulty adjusting to my new non-royal life that I was currently living. This explained why I was so confused about the lack of palace furniture, armoires for example. This explained why first thing in the morning I often confused my mother with my chambermaid. This explained my intense relationships with Disney princesses, and most of all, this explained my incessant desire to escape or go home. Never underestimating my toddler intelligence, my parents sat me down and carefully explained their past life theory to me. Afterward, they looked at me expectantly, perhaps hoping to see an instant transformation now that I understood that I had been going through. I looked right back at them. I had to admit, their theory had its merits. But it didn't change anything, did it? Whether I'd been a princess in a past life or not, I still wanted to be a princess in this life. As I grew a bit older, I wasn't long before I developed my own theory, and in my opinion, the evidence for this theory was equally overwhelming. I was obsessed with royalty and aristocracy from such a frighteningly young age that my parents often joked that I couldn't possibly have spawned by flower power equality-loving children of the 60s like themselves. And ironically, I couldn't have agreed with them more. If truth be told, as a child, as a teenager, and even into my 20s, I was never 100% convinced that the people I called mom and dad were actually my real biological parents. I know it sounds like a cliched movie plot, but I'm being totally serious. You want proof? All you had to do was look at them. Both of my parents had hair way past their elbows. That's right, both of them. My dad, with his long ponytail and thick dark beard, always looked like a cross between some kind of Indian guru and ZZ Top. And as for my mom, well, she was pretty, but the way she pranced around in long ethnic skirts and embroidered peasant blouses, she looked like she'd been raised in some kind of psychedelic pixie forest. Then there was me, an innocent child, a helpless victim of their hippie lifestyle. They dressed me in tie-dye and hemp fiber, fed me tofu and quinoa, and soothed me to sleep with the duck-like tones of Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. And if I was living with the hippies as if living with the hippies wasn't enough, they had to go and give me a hippie name. Not only that, they had to give me a boy's name. There's no logical explanation for it. I was named Jerramy, and for no other reason than it sounded pretty. I'm sure that after years of listening to non-stop Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, anything sounded pretty, but that's hardly an excuse. And don't even get me started on my middle name. It's Sage, as in the grayish-green cooking spice. My parents claim it represents wisdom, but as far as I'm concerned, they might as well have named me Jerramy Oregano or Jerramy Garlic. Deep down, I bet my parents questioned the biological facts of the situation too. I mean, surely if I were their real daughter, I would not have actively plotting an escape to life of royal elitism, but instead be fantasizing about selfless existence in the Peace Corps. At the very least, my parents hoped that one day I'd tear myself away from my books on royal protocol and get as excited as they did about grinding their own flour every night. But despite all evidence to the contrary, they continued to claim that I was conceived one starry night in a rundown miner's cabin deep in the Breckenridge Mountains. By them. So, my girlhood theory was this. The day I was born, a dreadful hospital mix-up occurred. The mix-up involved two young aristocrats from England, two ultra-liberal hippies from America, and two beautiful babies. Somehow on this historic day, my infant self ended up in the hippie Colorado home rather than the glorious, stately home in the English countryside. End scene. So that is the first 10 pages of Someday My Prince Will Come, True Adventures of a Wannabe Princess, a memoir by Jerramy Fine. Please go out and read it if you enjoyed it, the first 10 pages, because it is so good. I promise you it gets better than that. So yeah, go buy it. And I'll see you for the next 10 pages. If you have any books that you want me to read in the first 10 pages or whatever, let me know in the comments below. Thumbs up this, subscribe, comment, and so on and so forth. Share. Bye.